And now joining me in studio is economist Chris Hart. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us here at 8 and 7.
No, my pleasure.
And now, can the country trust the new finance minister that has been appointed?
Well, I think the problem that we face is that the cabinet reshuffle has taken place against, it looks like a background of acrimony within the ruling party, and the cabinet itself prior to the reshuffle was not really united. And of course there's it's like almost as if it was like the good guys put it against the bad guys, and as it's been portrayed. But I think where we need to look at the new minister's track record is not that clear when it comes to economic matters. My own observation when dealing with him personally and looking at platforms is that he's not really a strong friend of the private sector. All right, he I think favours a state-driven approach, to the economy, which of course is an important thing from a point of view of a confidence builder, is that he needs to shift in terms of what one would call as to the more moderate centre, and actually reflect that. So it's not just a case of only trust, and of course there's various things, expenditure things. The suspicion is that the agenda is to push things like the nuclear deal and possibly a variety of other issues to actually, you could say, open the purse strings for various projects that need to happen. And we're sitting at the cusp of junk status. And in a sense, that's the minister's challenge, is he has to gain the confidence of investors, gain the confidence of the marketplace. He has to gain the confidence of his tax base, because if there's a perception that this is was mainly to open the treasury for looting, as the one side would assert, if there's any smell of that, with it, given the high level of taxes, etc., it's not a strong step to see, the possibility of even a tax revolt, which would not be constructive. So if we see that we need to steady the ship very quickly. To, as I say, confidence is everything, and this is the challenge that the new minister has. One advantage is that there was quite a bit of conflict beforehand. Could he remove that conflict? But of course, removing the conflict naturally in Treasury is difficult, because everybody wants more money. There's nobody who says, no, please give me less money, right? So if you have to play the role of a gatekeeper as a Minister of Finance, otherwise the finances blow up. And we are, given the state of the deficit, that we have a deficit, that the government is running the deficit, and that expenditures are not really under control. Pravin Gordhan tried to control it. Malusi Gigaba has got a much tougher task to keep expenditures under control. But at the same time, the tax base is also in deficit. The small business sector is bleeding. You're not getting much taxes from that sector. The corporate sector's profitability is under pressure, and that profits is thing. And the household sector, that the main core of the tax base, is also in deficit. The tax base is already tapped out. And so you can't really, the scope to raise taxes to cover the deficit is fairly limited. And in any case, government is supposed to serve society as a whole, and you can't just say our deficit is more important than your deficit. We have to actually resolve these deficits together as a partnership, and that I think needs to come into forward. And the minister's talking about things like radical economic transformation.
That was something I was also going to touch on.
The president has spoken about it, and a lot of people look at this quizzically and say, what does that mean? All right, now it's important that we actually start, if we want solutions for the poor and not for the connected, it's important that this economy expands, because that's the only way you actually get inclusive growth. If you don't get an expansion of the economy, all right, and you sit with a fixed pie. Anybody who enters the economy needs somebody to leave the economy, all right, and that's the problem of the economic stagnation that we've had over the last 5-6 years. And if we don't deal with that, and the only way you deal with growing the economy, in other words, growing the capacity of the economy to absorb people into the economy, to get that participation, is that you have to have investment. There is no way around it. And if we lose investor confidence through credit rating downgrade and various other populist rhetoric, then we are going to go backwards as a country.
Now, looking at Minister Malusi Gigaba, what should he do differently when it comes to the economic transformation, which they have been calling it a radical transformation? What should he do differently from the previous ministers who have come into the position?
Well, my view is that up until now, the thinking has been to deal with what I call poverty alleviation. And economically, what you're doing with poverty alleviation, you're transferring resources to consumption, because it's things like grants to actually alleviate the immediate need that people have. Whereas poverty reduction requires you to shift and focus resources onto investment. All right. And what we've seen in the thinking of the last 7 to 8 years is that we've been increasing taxes on capital formation. You can't invest without capital, and we're capital deficient at the core of our unemployment problem and our economic exclusion, if you like. If I could call unemployment economic exclusion, at the core of that is a lack of savings and a capital deficiency. So when we are taxing capital, when we are capital deficient, to my mind, it's like eating seeds. And we've been eating seeds at a faster rate. So if we can turn that thinking around, it's great. The other problem is artificially raising the hurdle rate to invest in the economy. We're raising regulatory hurdles, for instance. It's becoming more and more difficult to actually just operate in the economy. South Africa has slipped to 105th in the economic freedom rankings, and we are still falling. If we can turn that around, that'll help, because capital flows to destinations that are easier to invest and to do business. We're making it more difficult in this country to invest and do business. And we need to be mindful that the biggest economy on earth, which is the US, right, when they've got very high taxes and very high regulations, it makes our life a little bit easier. Right? But with Trump, he said we're going to cut taxes. In fact, cut taxes drastically. We're going to actually cut regulation drastically. And we sit here in South Africa, right, we don't have a competitive advantage. We've got a competitive disadvantage against the US. So if they're cutting taxes and regulation, we have to respond, not comparably. We actually have to be competitive. And if we don't do this, in the last budget we raised taxes again, etc., we will find ourselves struggling for growth again, because it was an anti-growth budget. So we now need to start moving towards growth budgets, but not on a populist platform. We have to do it on sound, recognized principles, and that means tax cuts. It means easier regulations. It means a better labor environment. Because
Mr. Hart, I'm going to just interrupt you over there. We have unfortunately run out of time, but